All right, welcome to the conversation on the TYT network. Now we're going to go to Jeff Ernsthausen. He's a senior data reporter for ProPublica. They did an amazing story about the top 25 wealthiest people in the country and how they often avoid taxes, sometimes paying absolutely nothing. So it's an important piece that should inform public opinion. So Jeff, it's great to have you on with us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So first of all, the top 25, how much did they get away with? How deep is this problem?
So our story is about a relatively simple point, which is that most people listening to this show right now, they pay taxes whenever they get a paycheck, right? So you earn wages, you earn a salary, and taxes are taken automatically out of that. The ultra wealthy live largely outside of the tax system. So they're able to basically pay taxes when they make a decision, such as to sell stock. And so they can accrue vast fortunes without paying taxes on it by keeping their income as the IRS recognizes it down. So we looked at the top 25 for this story, and we found that over a 5-year period from 2014 to 2018, their collective wealth grew by $400 billion. And they paid federal taxes that amounted to just 3.4% of that.
So Jeff, of course, a lot of people will say and have said, yes, but that wasn't their income, that was their wealth, right? Their wealth grew by 400 billion, and you pay taxes on your income and not on your wealth. So when you look at their income, how did that play out? Is it, oh well, look, man, they're paying 40% of their income and they're abiding by the law and everything's hunky dory? It's just they're so rich that it's a small percentage, or were there issues there?
So nothing that we looked at in this story was about sort of illegal ways of getting around paying taxes. This is all sort of like routine legal methods for keeping one's tax bill down. That said, the income tax rate, sort of using the IRS definition of income tax rate, is also quite low for this group. We found that they were close to 16% over the 5-year period. And out of curiosity, I looked at my own taxes the other day, and I paid like 24% in federal taxes when you take in account payroll, Social Security and Medicare taxes plus federal income taxes. So they're paying a relatively low tax rate, even with the sort of classic definition.
So obviously the question is how. So you guys talked in that story, and we covered on the Young Turks, 2014, 2018. You just mentioned $400 billion. Now that's actually was a nice warm up act, excuse me, for what happened in 2020 and 2021, where they've accumulated a lot more wealth, right? That group, that's Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, etc., right? But those guys, it's one thing if they're not paying money on their wealth, but when they pay a lower tax rate than you and I do, that is infuriating. We'll come back to the wealth in a second, but on the income, how? How do they pay so little?
Well, it's a combination of things, right? So when you choose the time at which you take income, you can do things like time your charitable giving so that you're able to reduce that bill. You're also, for certain folks in these categories, like they can take certain kinds of write-offs, for instance, interest on investments. They can take off of their tax bill. So there's various ways of lowering it, but the sort of main thrust is that by keeping your income low, by, for instance, taking a small salary, but taking stock as your form of compensation, you can keep your income down and therefore keep your tax bill low.
So they're artificially keeping their income low and then also artificially inflating their expenses, thereby not having much to pay taxes on. So in terms of deflating their income, if you're, and pick a name out of a hat for all those guys, but let's stick with Musk. You're Elon Musk and you've got over $100 billion or whatever he's up to. But if you can't take any of it out because you're worried about paying taxes, well, it isn't gonna do you much good. But they do have ways of taking it out. I mean, it's not like they're strapped for cash, right? So how do they actually access their money?
Well, Elon Musk is a great example. So other disclosures with the SEC for Tesla show that he borrowed against some $60 billion worth of his shares of Tesla. So you might think, well, if they're not taking income, where do they get money? Well, one answer is that they can borrow money, right? The same way that sort of more ordinary American might borrow against the value of their house.
So, first of all, when I read that, I thought that was so funny. You really need a $60 billion loan? I mean, how are you going to run out of $1 billion? Why did you bother to borrow the other $59 billion? I mean, you couldn't possibly spend it. Even Elon Musk couldn't spend it if he tried. So I don't know why he did that. I don't know that you know why he took out such a gigantic number. But more importantly, well, if they take out money in loans based on the stocks that they have, that comes pretty damn close to cheating. And so is the government ever going to do anything about it? Is there anything, a movement afoot to say, hey, wait a minute, you can't just borrow on your stock. That's just a way of avoiding taxes, and it's super obvious.
Well, it's kind of interesting. The historical father of the income tax actually predicted this back in 1920 or so, sort of said that if you don't recognize this kind of asset growth as any kind of income, then people will just be able to borrow against it. And that's sort of exactly what's played out in the century that's followed.
Right, and so there's some folks there who are opposed to a wealth tax, right? But when they see a story like yours, it becomes super hard to oppose one. Because it's one thing if, hey, listen, you got a growing company and you can't get money out of it, right? Like in that case, Elon Musk is a bad example because he had already become a billionaire before he started Tesla. But let's take Mark Zuckerberg. So he starts Facebook, it's a growing company, but he hasn't actually cashed out anything. If the government says, hey, pay money on your theoretical wealth, he just doesn't literally have the cash when he was younger to pay it for it because the company hasn't gone public, it's not liquid, et cetera, right? But when they get to a stage where they're all over $1 billion, I mean, you don't have the cash to pay for it. Well, you just did the trick where you loaned money, where you borrowed money so you wouldn't have to pay taxes. So apparently you could borrow the money to pay the taxes. So doesn't that basically vitiate their argument against the wealth tax?
Well, our story was sort of focused on getting information out there that policymakers could use to sort of inform these discussions. But certainly people have thought about this, economists who have thought about this have come up with ideas for how you might handle something like that. For instance, people have proposed that you might be able to pay in kind, pay with shares of Facebook, for instance, or pay on the gains over a long period of time. So instead of, not like you pay on $1 billion when you earn the $1 billion, you could pay it out over the course of several years after that. And if asset values do go up and down, so if they came back down, you could always knock it off of the bill, or even possibly you could imagine some system where that was refunded.
Yeah, so now there seems to be less and less excuses for wealth tax. I'm curious, you were part of the team that did this great report. It got tons of attention, which doesn't always happen. So wonderful, right? A lot of people do great journalism about the injustice in the system and no one sees it. In your case, a lot of people did see it. So I'm curious, did any legislators reach out to you guys afterwards and say, hey, I want to find out more? Or has there been no political fallout from it?
Well, we heard from a lot of folks, mostly in the public domain. Twitter is often the place where people go to express their opinions about stories these days. So you've seen some reaction from folks like Elizabeth Warren, who've long been calling for this. And we've also seen sort of the other side of things, people calling for investigation into how we obtain this information. So you've kind of seen kind of both sides of reaction to this.
Well, Jeff, are you worried about that? Because so the IRS information of individuals is not supposed to be released. And so you guys note in the story, now normally that's not a thing that you guys would pursue, but these are the top 25 wealthiest people in the country, and public policy is very relevant in regards to them in specific. And by the way, you guys didn't mention it, but I'll finish the other half of the thought. Through their donations, they could basically buy our entire government. So if they are the purchasers of our government, I think it's more fair to be able to see what they're purchasing it with, and that includes their taxes or their lack of paying taxes. But when people leak positive stories in the government, even if it's classified or top secret, no one ever gets in trouble. But when folks leak things that are damaging to the powerful, well, just ask Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden how that turned out. So, are you personally concerned?
Well, of course, it's concerning when you hear about an investigation related to something that you're working on. But we take great comfort, I suppose, in the administration's statements several days before our story came out, saying that they would not be doing things like what we found out in recent days was being done by the previous administration, involving seeking people's emails or phone records. So we do take some comfort in that.
Yeah, and you're right to ask for that comfort, because the Obama-Biden administration was the one that started charging reporters with the Espionage Act, so you never know. So last thing, have you heard any defense from the top 25 to the story where they say, oh no, of course we should pay very little taxes. Taxes are for the little people.
Well, interestingly, there was a response from Warren Buffett, who has typically advocated for policies that might raise taxes on those who are earning high incomes. He said more or less that in regards to sort of his plan to give away all of his money prior to when he dies, and then of course that money won't then end up being taxed. And he said it's his preference to give the money to philanthropic causes rather than to pay down the U.S. debt. Which is, it's an interesting response. Of course, those charitable contributions may do a lot of good. It's just not an option for most of us to sort of choose whether or not our tax money is going to go, into the general fund or to things that we're interested in.
Yeah, there's only so much this can last. That people can't take this anymore. When wealthy people say like, oh, you have to pay your tax, otherwise we're going to put you in jail. But me, I choose to give it to some charities of my own, desire. And no, I don't choose to give it to the government. That is infuriating. And ironically, Warren Buffett is the best of them, because he actually is giving it to charity. The others are generally not doing that or lying about it. Anyways, that's my opinion on it. But Jeff was part of the ProPublica team that did a rare act of journalism, and we wanted to find out more about it and celebrate it here. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.